Welcome, everyone. I'm Renee. Yes, thank you. I'm Renee Muskies, Director of Operations for MusicPortland. I wanted to ask, first of all, how many of y'all are this is your first time at a First Monday? This is excellent. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. That's really great news, and it's a pretty great turnout, too. How many of you, this is your first time at Alberta Abbey? Yes, this is awesome. Okay. Advertising works, y'all. So, all right. Well, today we have a presentation on DIY versus pro, what you should know. We're very excited about that. I just wanted to, before we get into that, and I want to invite Sherry Jameson up here, who is running the Alberta Abbey right now, to say a few words about Alberta Abbey.
Thanks, everyone. A lot of you have probably seen me at MusicPortland events over the last almost 3 years, and I'm also part of the MusicPortland Music Policy Council. I'm really passionate about the MusicPortland community and what this experience and this group of people can do. And so now I have a relatively new job, being executive director of the Alberta Abbey Foundation, which is more than just a venue. We are a nonprofit that amplifies Black and underrepresented artists and communities. And so we help provide affordable gallery, education, and performance spaces, making it an accessible event space for people in their creative visions to come alive. So we have an incredible team here. As you can see, we have a very big space. We have 350 fixed seats here, and we actually have another big ballroom downstairs too, and lots of other fun little spaces around this very historic and wonderful building. So I invite you all to continue to be involved with the Abbey. You can find out more about events. You can find out about rentals, and also sound recording and audiovisual recording here at the Abbey at albertaabbey.org. And our tech director, Sean Flora, can't be here tonight, but he was super bummed because he was like, these are my people. And he is incredible, and he's done so much to help create this space and make it as wonderful as it is, looking great, sounding great. So if you have a group or want to do some recording, this is a great space to put on, do live videos, which, as you know, are absolutely key when it comes to booking gigs and getting your work out there in the world. So I invite you to come partner with us and just be part of our community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sherry. I just want to dive right in. So I just want to, before we start, I want to introduce to you Eric Priest. He's a University of Oregon law professor, but he's also a former studio owner and producer for 10 years. Back in the 90s is what you said. And he did have a publishing deal, and he wrote some hits for some European artists and stuff, so maybe he'll talk a little bit more about that too. But he did an empirical study about what's the success rates of DIY artists in commercial music and, versus professionally recorded music. So anyway, he knows everything about this. Come on up, Eric Priest.
All right, well, thank you everyone for showing up. I have to say, this is definitely the coolest venue I think I've ever given a law talk in before. I also have two of my law students from the U of O who are going to join me on stage, Michael and Alyssa. Both Michael and Alyssa have, so they were really instrumental in the research that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to explain why I think this research is relevant to musicians, the music community broadly. But both Michael and Alyssa have music backgrounds. Michael's a musician, comes from a musical family, and Alyssa spent many years working in the music industry, including at Pandora, and also at a foundation in Los Angeles for women in the recording business. So it's I've learned a lot from working with them, and they're going to help me present a few of the you could call it case studies. You'll understand what I mean in a minute. A few of the DIY artists that we've found that have charted. But that gets me into the subject of my talk. So my talk today, as Renee said, is about DIY artists and the likelihood of becoming successful as a DIY artist. Now, there are lots of ways that we can define success. Some people just think that, it's just getting a song written and recorded is a success in itself, and sure enough, it is. As Renee said, I spent many years working in the music industry, and I know what an accomplishment that is alone. But my co-author, a professor at Michigan State University Law School named Sean Pager, and I were interested in a different kind of success for DIY artists. We wondered to what extent are DIY artists charting? As I'll talk about, when I say DIY artists, I mean something more than just an independent artist. So we're not just talking about DIY in the sense that you're putting your own music out there in the world, you don't have a label backing you, that sort of thing. When I say DIY, and when I'm talking about DIY, what I mean are people who are doing everything themselves. They're recording themselves, they're mixing themselves, they're mastering themselves, they're doing all the editing. And so, in a way, our study is about music professionals. To what extent are music professionals professional engineers, professional mix engineers, recording engineers, mastering engineers, editors, producers? To what extent are these people still relevant in the digital age where everyone has GarageBand or some inexpensive or free high-quality recording software, high-quality recording tools at their fingertips? And so I'll explain in a minute how, as a law professor, I dug into this question, sort of what precipitated this question. So I start with the question, where have all the DIY artists gone? Why do I ask that? Well, for many years, going back about 20 years at least, people in my field, I teach copyright law, and people in my field, many scholars, have argued that that these cheap or free, easily accessible, democratizing digital tools that are in the hands of anyone who owns a laptop and maybe a cheap interface and an inexpensive microphone will open up a kind of floodgate of artists who can record and mix and master their recordings just as well as professionals did in the heyday of the big studios in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, right? 30 years ago, if you wanted to make a high-quality recording, if you had a band and you needed to mic drums and you needed to record guitar amps, right? And you needed to mic a vocalist and you needed to mic a bass amp, all of those things, you needed people who knew what they were doing to get a good sound. You needed people who knew how to position the microphones. You needed people who knew how to mix, how to carve out various frequencies in the mix to make space for different instruments to create kind of spatial cohesion within the mix. And all of these things required a high degree of technical skill, know-how, and of course expense. Now, about 20 years ago, when everybody said, gee, the internet's changing everything, digital technologies are changing everything, they're going to change how music is not only distributed and consumed, but also how it's produced. And of course, that's true. They have revolutionized how music is produced. But the predictions have been, and therefore, those professionals, the people who used to tweak knobs and move faders and put reel-to-reel tapes on the 24-track, those people are really not going to be important anymore. They're a kind of, paying them becomes a kind of social waste because we don't need that kind of expertise anymore. It can all be done by software. And that's great for musicians because now the cost of music, the cost of producing music, drops to near zero. If you can afford a laptop and an inexpensive USB microphone, you can make an album that is of the quality that you used to have to go to the record plant in LA to make. That was the story for the last 20 years. So I have a number of kind of paradigmatic quotes, and we don't have to look at them all in detail. But the gist is, right, this was in a law review article from 13 years ago. Albums can now be recorded in someone's home using a personal computer. They can achieve a quality that not so many years ago would have required a massive recording studio and the involvement of engineers and supporting musicians. Artists can take a home recorded album, make it available to a worldwide audience over the internet instantly. Here's another. Today, a home computer can be purchased for under $900. Recording and editing software and hardware can be purchased for approximately $150. These elements combined enable a musician to record music at home with almost the same acoustical quality as music recorded in a professional studio. The next quote, musicians once had to rely on expensive studios and highly trained engineers to record their music and big companies to manufacture and distribute it. All of that has now changed for the better. With a laptop, artists can produce high quality recordings on their own and distribute them via the internet. So what does this have to do with my field? What does this have to do with copyright? In fact, why are these are all copyright professors. Why are they writing about how inexpensive it is to produce music? Well, the idea is that sound recording copyrights have largely, at least as some people view them, as some people justify them, they're justified because of the high costs of recording. That in the past, it used to be the case that if you needed to go into an expensive $1 million studio in order to make a high quality recording, you might be spending $250,000 or $500,000 making that recording or more, and those are significant sunk costs that have to be recouped. And so if we grant a market right, a legal right that creates a market for your work that allows you to monetize your work on the market, copyright, that seems justifiable when you have such significant sunk costs. But hey, if it's free to record music, if everyone who owns a laptop, an Apple laptop has GarageBand for free, and GarageBand can give you 90% of what you got at the record plant in LA, right, or Sunset Studios, then who needs copyright? And so I ask, what does this have to do with copyright theory? Well, here's one argument made by a couple of economists some years ago, where they said, with modern internet distribution, laptop computer recording studios, the cost of producing music is quite small. The allegedly large fixed cost to be recouped via monopoly profits is not due to the actual economic cost of producing and distributing music today, right, because of this new technology, which modern technologies cut to a fraction of what it used to be. If we were to abolish copyright today, we are confident that the most important effect would be a vast increase in the quantity and quality of music available. Another very famous law professor, maybe the most famous intellectual property professor in the United States, Mark Lemley at Stanford, has written, an IP regime, intellectual property regime, based on the idea that reproduction and distribution, and also I think embedded here is the idea of production, the production of the original work, the idea that reproduction and distribution are costly and need to be encouraged becomes unnecessary. That IP regime becomes unnecessary in a world where reproduction and distribution become costless, right? The idea that IP is justifiable if, so copyright is justifiable if it is used to recoup significant sunk costs in the production or reproduction or distribution of a work. But this is a very techno-optimist view, right? This idea that if technology can do away with those costs, then the justification for the IP right is undercut or vanishes. And so, as I said, Professor Pager and I wanted to explore one assumption on which all of these arguments are based. And that assumption is that recording is free. Yes?
Just a quick question to clarify. Are these people talking about only the copyright in the phono recording and not the copyright in the song?
Well, they often don't distinguish, but that's what we focus on, is the copyright in the sound recording. Because in fact, so what our study is, I'm glad you asked the question because it takes me right to what our study has done. What we are doing is we're actually trying to put some academic rigor around the question of what recordings cost today. Is it true that the average, right, the assumption that is generally made in the scholarship that I just quoted, and lots of other scholarship in my field that I haven't quoted, the assumption is generally made that look, recording now is essentially free or almost free. And so if you eliminate the cost of recording, again, talking about the sound recording, right? If you eliminate the cost of recording, then the sound recording copyright is less justifiable. And of course, the sound recording copyright, as I often tell my students, is sort of among all of the copyright rights, it's a second-class citizen. Right? The sound recording copyright is already more limited than most of the other rights under copyright, including the music composition copyright. And so the sound recording copyright in some ways, right? For example, the sound recording copyright owner doesn't have a public performance right except for digital public performances like through streaming. But the sound recording copyright owner still in this country doesn't get paid when their songs are performed in a venue or on the radio, that sort of thing. And so in a way, the sound recording copyright is already on more tenuous ground, right? If as a right, and so there's kind of this rhetorical attack on the sound recording copyright. So one of the things that we wanted to do is ask about and look into and actually examine this premise. Is it true that, that recording is essentially free? That the average bedroom artist can get the same level of quality from GarageBand on their laptop that, as I said, you used to get when you'd go into a major studio and work with a big producer and experienced professional recording engineers and mixing engineers and mastering engineers. Is it really true that technology has obsoleted all of those things, all of those positions? Well, if it is true then we thought we should be able to find out in a couple of ways. One way is to look at the charts. If after 20 years, or during the ensuing 20 years since many of these scholars made their claims about DIY productions, if it's true that technology has obsoleted professionals, then we should be seeing a proliferation of recordings by artists that don't involve professionals, by bedroom artists on the charts. That's something that we can look at, that we can measure. If those were, because the charts are sort of one measure, one proxy for quality. Of course, they're an imperfect proxy, but they're one proxy that we have. We also interviewed a number of recording professionals and record company executives. We talked to recording professionals, including Larry Crane, who I don't see Larry out there, but I know he's out there, and there's Larry. So we spoke with Larry, had a great interview with Larry, and a number of other professional engineers, mixing engineers, producers, as well as record label executives, and major labels and smaller indie labels, and Matador, which is a large indie label. And we talked to people about what value, if you're a recording professional, what value do you add? And what do you see in terms of the quality of home recordings coming in? Are you effectively obsoleted? And of course, to some extent, right, there's a self-serving bias that, nobody's gonna say, yeah, I'm totally obsoleted. But we got some really great, really helpful, useful information from that. We also, as I said, talked to record labels, and after all, record labels, if it's true that anyone can record now by, sort of setting up their USB mic and hitting record on GarageBand, you would think they wouldn't be paying big recording budgets, right? Because if they don't have to incur that cost, why would they? Now, some people might argue that the major labels are dinosaurs and they just do things the way they've always done things. But like I said, we talked to indie labels too, and they put out very significant amounts of money in recording budgets to this day, and find it incredibly important to have their artists work with professionals, except in a very few cases, and that's what I'll be talking about. So we had this kind of two-pronged approach. We sort of did a quantitative empirical analysis of charts and a qualitative empirical data through these interviews with Larry and similarly situated professionals, really outstanding professionals in the field. So with regard to our chart data, I think this is very interesting. And ultimately, what I think is important to take away as musicians and people in the music industry is the value still of professionals working with people who know what they're doing and putting the best possible product out there that you can as a musician. So we looked at 4 major US charts at various times between 2020 and 2023. We looked at the Spotify Top 200, the Billboard Hot 100, the Rolling Stone Top 100, and something called the Rolling Stone Trending 25, which doesn't exist anymore, but we looked at it in order to get a sense of, well, let's not just look at what's in the top 100, but let's look at a measure of maybe some songs that are, I think that chart measured the fastest moving, or the songs in the previous week that weren't on the top 100 that had jumped the greatest number of positions or gotten the highest number of streams but didn't make it onto the top 100. So it's kind of what we wanted to do was look at this sort of beneath the top 100 was there kind of a wide galaxy of DIY music that was being heavily consumed. So that's why we looked at the Rolling Stone Trending 25. In total, we looked at 11 weeks of charts. So those are the weeks that we looked at from Spotify and Billboard, and then the Rolling Stone Top 100, and then I mentioned also the Rolling Stone Trending 25. So those are the weeks that we sampled. In all, we sampled 1,350 chart positions, but because many songs would appear on both charts or would appear longitudinally on the same chart in some cases for years, the song would stay on, say, for example, the Spotify Top 200 chart. So we didn't double count those. We didn't want to double count those. So we found 802 unique tracks. So of the 1,350, there were a total of 802 individual unique tracks that appeared in those chart positions. Please.
How are those chart positions determined? Like how does Spotify determine the top 200?
Okay, so the methodology that the charts use? Okay. All right, so that is a black box to some extent, and each chart uses different methodologies. What I will say is that that Spotify's charts are based exclusively on Spotify streaming data, so popularity, streaming numbers. But Spotify, it's a black box in terms of how Spotify will weight some of the streaming data differently, and it's not very transparent how they do that.
So that could be corporately biased.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, absolutely. And then the Billboard and Rolling Stone charts, those are they have a formula they use where they both incorporate streaming data as well as physical sales. And so I'll talk about your concern in a minute. Okay, so our methodology was we looked at these 802 individual tracks that appeared in the weeks that we sampled these charts. And what we did was we looked to see whether or not each given track was what we call DIY pure, which means was the track shepherded through the entire production and recording process by the artist, or did the artist work with at least one professional as part of the process? So if they were, if the artist did all the recording, production, mixing, engineering, editing, and mastering, we coded the track as DIY pure, with a few exceptions, and I'll talk about that in a second. If, however, let's say the artist did the recording, production, their own recording engineering, but they worked with a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer, then that was not considered DIY pure because you had the influence of a professional involved in the recording. What we're really trying to look at is how many recordings in which there were no professionals involved charted. Now, there were, in some cases, there were a few examples that we found of recordings or tracks where the artist did everything. So there was no one else credited for any of the recording process, production, mixing, mastering, but the artist was a total ringer, right? So it's somebody who, so Steve Lacy is an example of one of these artists who, had done, had credits on with other artists, had sort of been, had a background as a producer and worked on a number of albums. So with artists like that, we also coded those as not DIY because that's not the paradigmatic story. We're not talking about here about the professional who then goes in and makes their own album. What we're talking about here is democratization of these technologies, right? Can the average bedroom artist produce something that is commercially viable, or to what extent can they produce something that is commercially viable that's going to sit on a playlist right next to the most streamed songs in the world and sound comparable to the audience, right? So again, that's sort of what we're looking for. That's the case that we're looking for here. These numbers are unreadable, I can see there. And they're pretty unreadable on my screen too. It's really small. But suffice it to say that, in most weeks we found either 0 or maybe 1 DIY track that we coded as DIY on the charts. And therefore, out of a total of 802 unique tracks that we sampled, we found 8 that were DIY, or 1%. Now, what was really interesting about this data as well is that no matter how we slice the data, it always seemed to come up as 1%. So for example, if we looked at mega hits, the top 20, there was one DIY track, one track that we coded as DIY, out of 120 unique tracks that were in the top 20 among our sample over various weeks. So less than 1%. And that track we'll talk about in a minute. That track was the song Rich Men North of Richmond by Oliver. Is it Anthony Oliver? Am I getting that right? And that was a unique situation. That track, if you remember, was heavily driven by conservative, like social media and that kind of thing. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But that track made it into the top 20 in our sample. And so out of, one track out of 120, less than 1%. There were 4 DIY tracks, including that one, in the top 100 out of 550 tracks in our sample that were in the top 100, and then 4 DIY tracks out of 390 unique tracks that were in the Spotify tracks 101, or chart positions 101 through 200, so the bottom half of the top 200 of Spotify. Spotify, by the way, is the only chart that goes below 100, so we could only look below, at position below 100 on Spotify, as well as the 50 songs that we looked at that were on the 2 weeks of the Rolling Stone Trending 25, which also were not did not make the top 100. So among those, again, 4 tracks out of 390, again, about 1%. So no matter how we sliced the data, no matter where we looked, it was like always about 1% of the songs were DIY recordings, DIY tracks. Again, not independent artists. I'll talk about that difference in a minute. These are people who did the entire recording process themselves. Okay, so this is the point I just made. No matter how we slice the data, whether we looked at the tracks in the top 20, top 100, or outside the top 100, or if we looked at our data set as a whole, DIY tracks accounted for a minuscule fraction of about 1% or less. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the 8 tracks, or actually I'm going to have my students talk about the specific 8 tracks that we found in our data set. And again, these aren't the only DIY tracks that have ever charted. These are just the ones that appeared in the particular charts that we sampled. So Alyssa and Michael are going to quickly introduce these tracks to get a sense for what kinds of artists and what kind of tracks are we talking about.
Yeah, so starting with Oliver Anthony's Rich Men of North of Richmond. This track made it to number 6 on the Spotify Top 200 for the week of September 1st, 2023.
And I will just add, by the way, that doesn't mean that's the highest position it got to on the charts. That's just where it was when we sampled it. Yeah.
That's right, thank you. And this song was recorded while Oliver Anthony was performing live on his farm, and he had a manager, Draven Riff, who produced the track, and that involved setting up the mic and capturing the performance and probably some light post-production work on there. And it was released independently by Oliver Anthony. And this, as kind of Professor Priest alluded to, was kind of an outlier in what we saw, especially of how high it got in the charts, because part of what we think why he got so high was because of the popularity with conservative media, but also the song itself, the kind of the vibe is kind of authentic blue collar country. So the DIY recording of it kind of enhanced that feel that he was going for. And I think we can go next. Mm-hmm. The next one that we looked at was Grupo Frontera, and they recorded No Se Va and made it to number 157 on the Spotify Top 200 for the week of February 24th. And Billboard describes Grupo Frontera as a local band from Texas, and they were known for performing at weddings and other community events. But this song is notably a cover of a very popular Colombian pop song by a group called Morat, which we think the fact that it was a cover helped launch it up as high as it went as well. So, Rit Momney is our next one, and the song...
Not to be confused with Mitt Romney.
Yes, I was worried I was going to mess that up. But the song he recorded is called Put Your Records On, and like this last song we talked about, some of you might remember from 2006, there was a hit called Put Your Records On by Corinne Bailey Rae, and this is indeed a cover of that song. And it's kind of an updated version of that song where Rit Momney is singing over an electronic and programmed beat. So again, the cover kind of shows that helps get that placement on the charts. And then Zach Bryan actually had 2 tracks make it onto the Spotify Top 200 for the week of September 1st, 2023, and probably moved around a little bit there. I saw him all over the charts around the 2023 charts. And Heading South made it to number 36, and Revival made it to number 157. And these tracks were recorded pretty unconventionally. Zach Bryan recorded this album where these tracks were released in a horse barn behind his house, and there is one producer credited on this album, and the name of the producer was Leo Alba, and we did quite a bit of research trying to find who Leo Alba was, and there was really no indication that Leo was a professional, at least at the time of recording, so that's why we considered this one DIY. And this is a major, this artist really took off after this and ended up signing with Warner Records and won several awards, including an Academy Award of Country Music, a Grammy, and has sold over 30 million albums and singles. So this is one artist where we saw kind of launch off of their DIY to get signed and then go on to have quite a bit of success from that kind of launch.
All right, moving on to the next artist, we have here Eli Otto. If anyone can recall back to like 2019 through 2021, you had the hyperpop craze, and this is an artist who really got to take advantage of that and is really a great example of this whole thing actually succeeding. He mixed this on GarageBand all by himself. He put it on the Spotify, or SoundCloud, and it really just started trending after it was picked up by TikTok, which, once again, if anyone was on TikTok at the time, you would know this song was ubiquitous with TikTok videos. He did subsequently sign with RCA Records, as you see right there, and he has since released another album. All right, so this artist is someone that I had not heard of. This research was done before I joined the team. He's the one artist from the Rolling Stone Trending 25 list. He is a LA-based Ukrainian DJ who releases like low-energy EDM tracks, such as this one, Tokyo, that seemed to have been doing really well for itself back in 2021. Don't really have much on him, but he did just release a new single, so check it out. And then finally, we have Lil Peep, rest in peace, with his track Star Shopping. This was a very interesting one. As you can see there, there was a producer on it named Cryptic. However, what makes this one unique and why this is considered DIY is the origin of the song revolving around Lil Peep and Cryptic. They became friends on SoundCloud. That's how they kind of met each other, and eventually started working on this specific track after Cryptic sent a beat that he made. But in a later interview, Cryptic does mention that he really didn't even start making beats until after this song. It really was his first foray and first attempt. So even though, yes, you do have two people working on it, it was much more of akin to almost like a band situation as opposed to a Lil Peep searching out a producer. Additionally, what likely also played into Lil Peep's success in this thing's charting was actually his untimely death. And this was a posthumous release onto Spotify. It was only re-released in 2019, 2 years after he had passed away, and likely saw a lot of success due to the reinvigoration of like the emo rap trend at about that time.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So as both Michael and Alyssa mentioned, there are a few tracks here that have producers. So we dug into the backgrounds of those producers and were generally satisfied that they were, as far as we could tell, not people with a professional track record. So they were friends or co-workers, or in this case, someone who was also just kind of starting out, just a bedroom, really a kid. He said when he made the beat for this song, Star Shopping, it was the first, kind of like the first beat he had ever made, sort of thing. So we considered that a DIY artist and production team. Okay, so there are a few caveats that I want to point out about what we found, or some common threads that run through our findings that also, I think, tell us a little bit about what it means to be a DIY artist that charts. So for one thing, as Alyssa and Michael pointed out, covers tend to give you a leg up, not surprisingly, right? And part of the idea here is that that a cover immediately gets consumer attention, and if the recording is maybe not quite as good as other professional recordings, you're maybe more willing to overlook that as a listener because you know the song, right? You're already drawn in because you know the song. Interestingly, I'll point out that is not always the case, or maybe it's much harder if it's not a cover. In fact, so we talked about Zach Bryan. When we were doing research on Zach Bryan for this paper, I read a Pitchfork, a review in Pitchfork, the music review website, about Zach Bryan's self-recorded album. And basically they say in the review, this is great music if you can get past the bedroom production. Right? And clearly people could, because maybe the music was that powerful. But, you're going to have really powerful music that connects at a certain level for people to be able to overlook the production, right? When a reviewer has to say, you may not be able to stick with this because of the production quality, but if you can, it's worth it. Okay. Some of these received external boosts. So, for example, the Anthony Oliver track was kind of an unusual, unique situation. And also, and this is something that we heard from producers like Larry Crane and others that we interviewed, there are certain genres of music that's just easier to do DIY, right? It's easier to do electronic music. It's easier to do hip hop if you're just gonna rap over a pre-produced beat than it is to do like rock or jazz or other types of music that might require more skill with microphones and mic placement, live recording, that sort of thing. So not surprisingly, all of these tracks are either very simple arrangements, like just an acoustic guitar and a voice, or an acoustic guitar and a voice and very, very simple, maybe rhythm track or something, or they're electronic music. The one exception was Grupo Fronteras, and that was a recording of a full band. And the interesting thing is, if you listen to it, the quality is not great. But people were willing to overlook it because it was sort of a unique performance of a song that they knew, right? Not surprisingly, as soon as that took off, they went, signed a record deal, did a collaboration with Bad Bunny, worked with producers all over the place, right? So they weren't like, hey, we're DIY and we're gonna stick with DIY. And that's a story that we see across the board for the most part, that these artists, once they kind of got their moment, they weren't like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go back and record on GarageBand. They were like, okay, I'm gonna work with the best people in Nashville, or I'm gonna sign a record deal and do this right. So back to the question of, are the charts, do they really tell us much? Are they a reasonable measure? Part of no, in some ways, we acknowledge they're an imperfect measure, for sure. And I'll talk in a minute about why. But they're the only publicly available measure that we have of popularity that we can sample over time. So we just kind of have to live with the imperfections and do the best we can. And they're widely accepted, flaws and all, as indices, popularity indices for music tracks. But some of the objections that we note out here are, for example, aren't the charts heavily manipulated, right? We've already heard that objection. Doesn't big label influence and payola goose sales numbers and manipulate the charts? Aren't there stream farms and fraudulent streams? The answer is yes, but for time reasons, it probably doesn't change our findings. The fact that the charts are to some extent manipulated doesn't change our findings that much. All of these things exist. It's just unclear the extent to which they impact the overall chart. Like, a lot of the manipulation is, say, for example, to get to the #1 position, or a lot of streaming manipulation is by lower level artists who never chart, who are trying to either manufacture buzz or do royalty skimming by having fraudulent stream farms. But it's not stuff that ever charts. Now again, it's not to say that the charts are not manipulated. They are and they can be, but in a way, like I said, this is sort of the best data that we have. And there's another point I want to make too, because I asked earlier, is there, maybe the charts aren't very good because, they're owned by the major labels, but there's this kind of wide galaxy of DIY artists beneath. We don't think that that's the case, partly for a couple of reasons. First of all, the frequency of DIY tracks in the lower half of our sample is the same as in the top half. If the lower down you go, the more DIY recordings you find, we should already start to be seeing that even in our sample. The lower we go, that number should start to increase, but it really doesn't. It's also the case that charting artists generally account for the vast majority of streams, period, not just the streams on the chart. The top 1% of artists account for 90% of all streams, and the top 10% of artists account for 99.4% of all streams. So if you're a DIY artist who's not in the top 10%, you are fighting for the last 0.6% of streams, right? So, therefore, we also conducted a number of qualitative interviews, as I said, and when we talked to people like Larry Crane, record executives, other producers who've worked with a lot of DIY artists, their estimation came in about where we found the numbers on the charts, at about, some said as high as 15% of the artists they worked with, they felt like could do a professional level recording from their bedroom. Most of them said around 5%, others said 1%. We have one Grammy-winning mix engineer who said, none, I've never seen it. So there were also lots of stories from pros, like Larry, who said they spend more time fixing than mixing. Some of them pegged it at about 75% or more of the work they get from home recordings as being really just rescue jobs. Okay. I'm going to skip this for time reasons. I do want to make this one point because this is really important. I think this is really important. I said there's a difference between DIY recordings and independent artists. We found on the chart 52 independent self-released songs or songs released by smaller independent labels, which is 7 times higher than the number of DIY recordings. In other words, your chances of charting, if you work with a professional and self-release, at least based on our data, was 7 times higher than if you do it yourself. That suggests that having professionals involved matters, because we did find it certainly wasn't impossible to chart as a self-released artist. And TikTok, for example, is a platform that makes that even more viable, increasingly more viable for artists, but you're much better off if you're working with professionals, statistically, than if you're doing it yourself. So what is our final takeaway? Our implications for the artists are that your odds of making it are already incredibly long. You're competing with 11 million artists currently on streaming services. There are 184 million tracks now estimated to be on streaming services, and over 100,000 new tracks are uploaded every day onto streaming services. It's a fire hose of music just being blasted, right, into these services. You have to be able to grab your audience, capture their attention, and therefore presenting your work in the best possible form is a matter of make or break importance. By the way, of those 184 million tracks, it's not like every one of those tracks is listened to. In fact, there's a company called Luminate that does streaming data analysis, and they estimate that 45 million of those 184 million tracks have 0 plays on those. So if you work with professionals, our data suggests that your chances of your track not being one of those 0 played tracks, of getting some commercial success, are many times higher than if you do everything yourself. In other words, the folks like Larry Crane and other professionals still really do add value, and doesn't seem to be the case that you can just press record on GarageBand and the world of sort of recording professionals becomes obsolete. No, there still really are significant costs to making music, and there's significant value in working with professionals. So that's what we found.
Okay, I want to introduce our panelists to you today. We have, go ahead and come on up, y'all. We have, first of all, I'll go ahead and start with Clara Baker here, who just got up. Clara is a producer, songwriter, and audio engineer that records, produces, and mixes music at several full-service recording studios in Portland, as well as her home studio, and she calls the Bakery. She specializes in like folk, indie, and pop production, and also composes music for film, TV, and other media. She's a member of the Recording Academy and works mainly with singer-songwriters in Portland and from around the U.S. We also have, I've got Kevin Hahn over here, raise your hand. Kevin runs Opal Studio, and is that also Primal Recording Studio? Okay. 2 studios and has been involved in music production for over 20 years. He works with local and international artists, and past clients include Scorpions and Portland Trail Blazers. We've heard lots about Larry Crane tonight, over here. Yes. He's the founder and editor of Tape Op magazine and owner of Portland's Jackpot Recording Studio, a freelance producer, engineer, mixer who has worked internationally, and the archivist for the estate of Elliott Smith. He's worked with artists like Sleater Kinney, the Decemberists, Jenny Lewis, M. Ward, Elliott Smith, and more. And then definitely last but not least, Amy Dragon, if you want to raise your hand. Amy is a mastering engineer, freelancing from Telegraph Audio Studio. She's been working on audio since 2013 and was also a manager for a while at Cascade Record Pressing. She works with bands and labels big and small, locally and around the world: Thrill Jockey, Kill Rock Stars, Sony, Righteous Babe, etc. Recent projects have included Shamir, Rhiannon Giddens, and Glitter Fox, and many more. So thank you, panelists, for being here tonight. I'm going to be here at the podium. It feels a little bit I don't know, formal or something, but we just have a few questions for you tonight related to the presentation. Wanted to, first of all, ask you, can you recount a story where it could have been better if the band had come to you first? And is there anyone that wants to take that one first? Clara, go ahead.
Yeah. I'll be brave.
Yeah.
My name's Clara. I would say that what I do is I'm a producer and an engineer and a mixer, so I kind of do it all. I can, except for mastering, that goes to Amy. So a lot of what I do with artists when I'm producing is serve in both a role of helping shape the artistic vision and obviously the audio, but also kind of working in a project management role as well. So I've definitely had a few artists come to me after sort of maybe bopping around to several different studios, or having a friend record a little bit in their house or whatever, and sort of come to me with like 3 or 4 hard drives and just say, here, and kind of try to cross their fingers, hope and pray that everything that they had been working on over the past year was on there somewhere. So I think that in those situations, it's definitely okay if artists want to work with me just in a mixing capacity or just recording and not producing, whatever. I'm happy to do any of that. But I'd say in a lot of situations, it's helpful if you think you might want to work with a producer to meet with them as early on in the recording process as you can, so that you can kind of make a game plan and utilize that kind of those project management skills and that kind of hat that we all kind of have to wear. So yes, the pile of hard drives, I wish that I had been on the front end of that rather than the back end.
Totally. Anyone else want to speak to that, Larry?
I've been writing about this for like nearly 30 years at Tape Op, so.
So we should just read the magazine.
Yeah, so we'll just do that. And then I sat down this afternoon and I took your questions that we were sent, and I think I wrote another, couple of pages. I mean, here's the thing. This is what the beauty of it is. I really promote musicians recording themselves if they want to, if they enjoy it. For anything, to have a demo, to remember a song, anything. As an archivist, I wish that my friend Elliott Smith had recorded some of his songs that he didn't bother to finish, or things like that. So like, please record, do it. Don't expect to get fucking great at it. Jesus Christ, people. I've been in studios since I was 21, and I'm 61. So I spent 40 years going into studios as a musician and then as an engineer, producer, etc. And it's just not that fucking easy. And I love that Eric did this thing. And I'm going to swear, so if you have kids here, I don't see any, but I'm really sorry. When Eric told me about this thing, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in, because this is the misunderstanding, especially because of all the tech bro assholes from Northern California. They wanted to sell us this dream that they could, number one, give our music away for free, thank you very much, and that it's worthless now. I guess the copyright says that our sound recordings are worth, they're trying to say that, as Eric points out. And here's the thing. You can buy a mic, and you can buy a Focusrite interface that's pretty darn good. You need to teach yourself how to really hear when you're making records, and you need to get outside of yourself. And there's no way, like, I'll point out this example. As a singer, which I've done as well, if you want to record yourself singing, that's great. And you can get, after a while, you can probably get a few good takes, but when I get someone in to sing, and I'm finishing off a record I'm producing, I'm like looking at every word. I'm helping them change words to make it even more exciting or important, coherent maybe. And I am coaching them. I'm singing parts back to them, and I'm going, no, don't end it like that. Do this. Take out that word so this phrase rolls over the beat better. Like, do all this stuff. Now, if you just record yourself and you just get a good take, that's okay. But a great take is one sometimes that needs a lot of finessing. And that vocal on most pop music and what have you is like the one thing that's connecting to the listeners, So it's like, you can't really do that by yourself. You can't get that coaching. You can't get that whole experience of someone really investing in your material with you and finding, taking that to the finish line.
So yeah, some of it's kind of just about the feedback. I mean, even having somebody else in the room, like giving you that feedback in process, Did you want to say something, Kevin?
Adding to what Larry just said, just think of it as like, how long did it take you to learn an instrument? Like a guitar. I mean, anyone can have a guitar, but it takes time and, energy and talent, to make it work. Recording is just like that. It's a discipline. It's like a thing that, I feel you, Larry. It's like we spent, the hours, learning our craft and it's really a lot more than just plugging a mic in and making sound. I got sound on the computer. It's like, yeah, it's really, there's so many other things that go to it, so many nuances of recording that for me, it felt like I was like 7 years into it until I felt like I knew what I was doing, So, and this is like,
even then,
after 25 years now,
yeah.
So anyways.
I wonder, Amy, because you're a mastering engineer, I'm sure there's a lot you could say people could be doing before they get to you.
Yeah, that was going to be my 2 cents. I'm at the end of the line. So, if I'm asking that question or if I'm having that conversation in my head, it's usually going back to what these folks have already said. I wish that you would have recorded it somewhere with someone with a little more skill, or if you recorded it yourself, I wish you would have hit someone up to help you mix. And I think another area that I often feel like most often wish that folks asked me questions for before is related to work with vinyl, because I do a lot of work in that area, and I'll often get people that I've either worked with or people that just know that I know about that format, who will have, gone to a pressing plant that's new or less than reputable, or didn't get a test pressing for some crazy reason and got a record back that didn't sound good. So I often end up consulting about stuff like that too.
Yeah. I will say, I remember doing a vinyl with you and not knowing that I had only limited time to do that. And so, again, to speak to Clara's point, if you talk to a producer first before you plan things, that's important. So. But that leads really great into the next question. If you have a limited budget as an early artist or a DIY artist, I guess, then to spend on a professional production, where would any of y'all think that money is best spent? Like, where would you, put those limited funds?
I can be brave and go again. Well, meeting me for coffee is free, or a Zoom call is free. And again, I think I'm very much of the mindset of measure twice, cut once. So that's referring to like woodworking, but also I think can apply in our field as well. So the more, I'm happy to work with people of all sorts of budgets, and but I can't help you, craft that vision and utilize your budget best unless we talk about it from the very beginning. So I think if someone came to me and they said, I have $150 and I want to record a song, I'd say, great. You're going to get really, really good at figuring out how to do this on your iPhone, and then we can get a professional to master it. Like it's been done. But if you have, more money, if you have $500, maybe we can have 2 hours in the studio and then I can mix it. If you have $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, we can talk about bringing in a full band, getting in a pro session musicians, working in the studio of your choice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, people feel really precious about the money that they have, and I totally understand that. But I think, again, just having those conversations at the very beginning, when you're even in the pre-production process, are gonna help you get the most out of each of your dollars with that. And that's kind of where we can weigh out, well, is this something that you could get a good vocal take at home? Or do you want to be in there getting, Larry or me or Kevin or a producer who's really getting those, that emotional resonance out of each take? So it's hard. I think there's many different ways that you could allocate limited funds, but you got to have that conversation with the professionals. And like I said, taking me out for coffee is free.
Very well said. That's great. I totally, I second that. But yeah, it's you do need to speak to somebody, like what can we do, and because they're gonna have with experience, you're gonna have other ideas, and also everyone just has different needs. Someone might have a strength in this area, and like, hey, you're good there, but you might consider, getting some help on this. I think kind of going back to, your presentation was awesome. But going back to his point, it's in theory, it can be done. I feel like I can make a record on a laptop, or Larry could, if we had to. But it's like the expertise, and the experience, and that's the thing that kind of you're paying for too, besides the gear and the space. But yeah, definitely talk to someone and like, what can we do? Like in the beginning, and I think that'll be super helpful in the end result.
So it sounds like investing in consultation is kind of where y'all are starting, at least.
You got to figure out, what are you trying to do? This is kind of the weird part about recording, is like, well, what is it you're trying to actually end up with? And I'm not talking about fidelity or things like that. I'm just like, who's listening to it? Where is it going? How is it going out there? What are you trying to make this release do for you? If you're recording music, you're obviously hoping someone hears it. And so what's the end goal here? So in some cases, maybe a real rough and tumble loose recording like Zach Bryan's a great example, of that connected because it was so good. And I think that the problem people have sometimes is they do sometimes mistake fidelity for success, like, if it's like done in the studio, it's going to just sound better. It's like, well, not if you didn't go meet with the person, figure out what you get on the same page and all that stuff. But I got one story. I think it's kind of related to this, but I had a band once come in, do an EP with me, on tape or whatever back then. And we did this EP. It was real simply recorded over just a handful of days, mixed it. And it sounded good, it sounded as good as I could imagine that band sounding. The next time they called me, they said, we bought a Pro Tools rig and we did it ourselves. It was after the 001s, 002s came out. And I'm like, and they're like, can you mix it? And I'm like, oh, okay. So they'd spent, $1,800 or what those 002s were, right? They spent that much at least, on the Pro Tools rig. And then whatever they had, mics and speakers and things, headphones, whatever they're using. They put every mic in the wrong place. they overloaded most of the channels. Like, so a vocal would just have one of those digital overs, like, in the middle of a word or something. No way to fix it back, especially back then. And they put they took the snare. They were like, oh, there's enough snare in the overhead mics. We'll just put it under the snare instead. The one mic on the snare. All these things are just so backwards, which could be fun for some artists, but no, they just made everything sound awful. I could barely get a mix out of it. And I turned to them and I said, you should have just saved the money, come in here. I was $250 a day back then, me in the studio. Very affordable. I'm not that cheap anymore. Sorry to anyone.
He's worth
But, this record sounded like crap, and I just didn't understand that thought process,
Yeah.
That was weird.
I've always heard that if you're that the original source being the best is where you start from. And do you agree with that? It's you can get all this expensive equipment, but if you haven't worked on your performance, then it's not going to hide it.
You take a mic and where do you put it? People put them in the wrong places all the time. That don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you get weird recordings.
Think of it this way. You should be able to put the faders up, and you should be about 70% there. Yeah. That's really, because if you start right here, someone can make it that much better, but if you start here, you can make it that much better. So that's kind of the test, it really, you can enhance things in the mix, and you can fix some things in the mix, but that's the importance of the tracking stage, the decisions you make during that is like a huge part of it. So think of it that way. You put the faders up, and that's where you're at. That's where you're starting. So
Eric had that quote earlier. The more fixing than mixing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
You're going to say, Clara?
Oh, I was just going to say that, sometimes the difference between spending $100 in the studio and $800 in the studio, is a couple hours versus a whole day. And that could be whether or not you've practiced with a click track. And if you are familiar with how to record with that, if you're using a click track in the studio, which is very common practice. So there's so many things that you can do before you even get to the studio that's gonna save you time and it's gonna save you money, but those are some of the conversations that have to happen before you even get there. I'm wearing a shirt that says fix it and pre. So
that's perfect.
It's gonna be my theme today.
I just did a tape-op video shoot in Seattle, and one of the videos we did was about why do people record something and then send it to me to mix and then go, oh, I want the guitar to be distorted. Distort the guitar and record it. What the fuck is, and I get this all the time. They'll be like, oh, I don't want everything so clean. And it's like, well, why was it recorded clean then? It's really weird to me that the aesthetic that they have in mind is not the thing that they're tracking. This happens all the time. It drives me crazy.
Since we're a little bit over on time, I want to just ask one more question, and then we'll go to the audience questions. And when we do that, go ahead and we do have a mic over here, and we'll ask you to just come up and line up and go to the mic. So one more question, and this was actually a question from Eric. There are numerous software options on the market that purport to use AI to mix and master recordings. So, will you be replaced by AI?
Fuck no.
I know, Amy.
No.
Amy has thoughts.
No. Mastering engineers are not going to get replaced by AI. I think AI is a curiosity that I have in terms of how it might enhance software tools. It might make them more interesting. It might make someone who's starting out have some opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise had. But in terms of AI mastering, I think the results are still pretty not good in terms of outcomes. I think there's a lot that it doesn't do that human beings are always going to do better, and maybe not always. I'm gonna put a pin in that one. I'm gonna wait and see. Who knows what it will do or won't do? But for now, no, not anytime soon.
I kind of have a kind of balanced kind of, I don't think it's totally bad. I don't think it's totally good. Just like anything, it's just another tool, just like auto-tune. It's another tool. You can abuse it. You can use it in a tasteful way. But yeah, the way for instance, I just bought a voice replacer tool, that replaces vocals. And for me, it's not like I'm just going to try to get someone to be a better singer or anything like that. It won't fix that. But I do a lot of productions where I'll do a lot of the tracking, a lot of tracking for clients, and I'll do the background vocal parts. But I might have wanted like 3 female singers to sing the background part. And it's just like, you know what, that'd be cool. Like I said, I don't think you could use it for like a lead vocal, but it's just a tool. Like, you know what, instead of, I don't have the time to go and get 3, backup singers, at this and limited budget, and they can't afford it. So I'm just gonna do this real quick, and then we get the result. But that's just one way of, you're making it work for you. I'm not, using it to replace music or, whatever, mixer, master, or anything like that. It's just one little fraction that can be helpful. So, yeah, so anyways.
I mean, I just wrote a review of a thing called Rebeat by Wave Machine Labs, the Drumagog people. And Rebeat will take a stereo or mono, just a track of drums, and split it into the components that we normally want, like kick, snare, hi-hat, crash, etc. Seven components. And it was trained with AI because, a person can listen to a drum track and go, well, that's the kick, that's the snare, that's the tom. And they used AI training to teach this piece of software how to delineate what's what, and it works really well. I've never heard anything like it. It's unreal. So that's the kind of thing where you're like, that's cool, they've used this training to do that. As far as, like, everyone knows Lander, those assholes that do online mastering. So I've been in email arguments with them as well. But they have a service where they'll do mastering for like $25 or something online. And so I was like, I'm so curious. And I sent them a track. It was a rough mix of an album in progress. And I sent it to them, and they sent it back. And I matched it with stock Pro Tools plugins. In 7 minutes, I matched their master quality. So that gives you an indication. And I would have gone much further too if I was really mastering it myself, which I don't do. But it was amazing. It was the laziest garbage mastering job I've ever heard. So, and now there's like mixing type ideas and stuff that people are going to say that could get automated. It can't make the decisions that a skilled mix engineer is making based on the music and the emotions.
Instincts. Instincts that people have.
No way. It doesn't care how much music you pipe into that stupid robot, it's not going to do shit. So I just don't even see. It'd give you back something different, right, than what you feed in, but it's not going to be a creative, amazing mix that heightens the emotionality of the track and everything,
Well, and just to say with Kevin, like what you were saying, it's like it's useful in a pinch, but also like if AI, if it's anybody using the AI, that's one thing. But if it is a professional using it, do you think that's like, that could make a difference too, right?
I don't think it's going to get to the point. I mean, it's like art. You can get AI to make art, right? Mm-hmm. But is it going to resonate with you? That's. Yeah. I mean, that's what music is. It's like energy and mm-hmm. Emotion. I mean, you can, like I said, you can have to have a semblance of it, But there are certain things that are a common thing in certain genres where it can kind of replicate. If like. Most metal records sound the same, or most, singer-songwriters, they just kind of have a vibe to them that you can, that it can kind of replicate. But, to me, it's just like a singer or a musician. Like there's something about the soul of their performance that
Absolutely,
that we are drawn towards. And for me, like the AI thing is. Like if it's a really minor role in something, like you can get away with that. But I think it just can't be like the main part of it.
Yeah. Totally, Clara.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that for so many people and artists, as we were seeing, there's so much music on Spotify, right, or on streaming, and so much of how you are sharing your music comes with a story about it. So whenever I'm working with artists, I tell them I care as much about the product that we're making as the process when we're making it. And I want them to have a positive experience. And I think it's a lot different if you're trying to market your music and you just say, yeah, I'm a singer-songwriter and I had AI make this. Like that's maybe a cool story a couple for the first few times. And the other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of my work in the past year has been producing music for commercial media, so like TV shows, ads, things like that. And a lot of the companies that I'm working with actually have us sign agreements that we won't use generative AI in any of our work because of the copyright
That's awesome.
issues, and they just won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. The music supervisors, all the agencies, they're all worried about getting sued or having copyright infringement issues. So for right now, it's feeling positive,
That's
at least
good.
on some of these
Yes.
commercial fronts, that they're not at all willing to work with producers or composers that use that.
Okay, we're going to end on that good news right there. So thank you all so much. Yeah.
So if you have a question, come on down.
Yeah.
You can just queue up right here. Anybody? Anybody? You're so quick. You were in the front. Smart. Right here. Sorry, he jumped.
Derek got in line. Okay.
Eric, you talked a lot about professional resources in terms of the personnel and the investments they've made as professionals over the course of a long or a short career and everything in between, and how much that means to the value for artists putting work out and then ultimately the commercial viability of that. Kevin, you talked a little bit about gear and space, and I think it's a little more obvious about how much that equipment costs, and then the expertise of how to use that equipment. And then we've got on top of that the space that you actually work in, whether it's a dedicated bedroom or home office at home that we're doing all kinds of important, valuable professional work in, or facilities like Telegraph Mastering or Jackpot Studios, where you have a commercial institution that you've put time and energy into developing that over the years, and the extraordinary financial investment you've got in that facility itself and what that provides for your clients. So I'd just love to hear folks sound off on that a little bit.
I mean, one of the points that I was going to make earlier too is like being able to hear what you're doing, and not just the training yourself to hear part, but actually having monitors that you can listen to stuff on that actually give you really hardcore, strong information in a Derek, a decent sounding room. You know, that's one of the things that a lot of times I find when I'm working with clients remotely. I do tons of remote mixing, that I'm always curious, like, what the hell are they listening on? Because I get weird feedback sometimes. Generally better than it used to be by miles, because a lot of people can buy some somewhat affordable monitors now or did good headphones and get a good perspective. But that's a big thing. Listening on what you're listening on and being able to hear stuff clearly is so important, and that leads to better decisions, all this work.
Also, like the investment in gear, there's just certain gear that just have mojo to it, you know? Like one of my favorites, of course, is like API preamp. There's something about that unit. When I use that, I mean, like I said, you can get a pretty good sound with like you said, like a Focusrite or whatever, but like there's something about running it through certain gear that it just like, I remember getting pieces like that where it just makes your job like, oh, that's what I'm looking for. Or, you know, for years, like I've always struggled with like trying to get a tone that I hear in my head or the ones you hear on records, you know, and just kind of getting to use something like that, you're like, there it is, you know? So that's definitely one of the strengths of like a pro studio, where they have the palette of, you know, colors that you can choose from, you know, as opposed to just having 2 channels of preamp or whatever, you know, that.
Yeah, I mean, like Jackpot, we got hundreds of channels of things to run audio through, you know, and it's like that, they're all choices and they all make a really big difference in the productions, yeah.
For the sake of time, I just want to, I know we've got 5 people. I just want to make sure to keep your questions brief, and I think we'll just have like 1 or 2 people respond, and not maybe not everybody, but yeah, and we'll probably just go with the 5 people in line at this point. So go ahead. Can you say your name?
Hi, my name's Mike. Thank you all for being here. Great presentation. Just curious, thinking from the DIY side of things, my experience in the circles that I run in, the DIY line runs right up to mixing and mastering and stops there, right? So we're bedroom producers that are doing all of our production and all of our arrangement, but then we're handing off the mixing and the mastering to somebody else. So what is your I would be curious to see what sort of research the penetration into the marketplace has with that sort of approach, and what your advice to the people who are starting out that way, and that's the way they're thinking about their music production and the best next steps to take it to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you. So we didn't, as I said, we just looked to see was there at least one professional involved. On the chart research, one of the things that we did here in our interviews, so in the qualitative research we did, was that, of course, this is a very common approach, and that it's easier to have success with that approach in certain genres than it is with others. So as a EDM, hip hop, maybe singer-songwriter if it's really simple arrangements, that kind of thing. But there is that kind of that small percentage of artists that were just so talented. In fact, one producer we talked to said, every once in a while I'll run into an artist who's like a prodigy, that they can just sit down and they've had almost no experience or whatever, and they just kind of, it flows for them, but that's 1% or less. That in most cases, as I said, the experience was that home producers, home productions tended to come in with more problems than well, like I said, about 75% was the number we often heard. Sort of 75% of the projects are really more like rescue jobs as opposed to, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to spend my time mixing or, and doing something really creative with it and taking it to another level. It's like, can I just salvage this, So that doesn't really answer your question about how successful they are. But we certainly saw tracks that had significant success with really talented artists, who are good producers. One band, I think they're called AJR, showed up on the charts a lot. That did almost everything themselves, but like worked with a mastering engineer at the end of the line. So it's certainly, we did see that, but again, more in hip hop or EDM would be more. Yeah, the styles that it's more conducive to.
Cool. All right.
I guess what would be your best advice to prevent a rescue from a bedroom producer?
Yeah. Fixing it at the source, but we can chat later if you want. I'm sure we'll be around.
We'll do the next question for the second time. Thank you so much.
Mike stole my first question. I'm 28. All of the artists I run with, all of us who do our own DIY recording stuff, the prevailing wisdom amongst all of them, the one thing that we all agree on is always pay to have your shit mastered by someone else. We all have to do everything else ourselves. We cannot afford these other things ourselves. But you have to pay to get a mastering engineer of some caliber, probably a SoundCloud dude, because they will just be someone who doesn't fucking know you and will hear something different and get that mastered. So I just want to say, I was very shocked to hear the opposite coming up from here, just because it's totally different in our world. In our recording budgets. But I'm 28. I've worked with a producer exactly one time on a record I was, in a band I was in where frankly one of the members had dough and could pay for that shit. Yeah, I'm very intimidated by the concept of ever talking to a producer, largely because I know I can't afford it, or at least I can't afford to record with them really in a meaningful way, in a long form way, maybe an AP. And I don't know how to talk about it, how to talk about my own music with them. I don't know how to approach them about it and seek their advice in a way that doesn't feel weird. It's just something that's so distant from me. So what would your advice be to someone who wants to make their recording budget go as far as they can, but is intimidated at how you start this process? What would you say?
It's all collaboration. All of it. If you play with other musicians, it's collaboration. If you hire someone at any step of the process, it's collaboration. And I've tried to point out in Tape Op magazine for years, it's like, find the people that seem to get the kind of music you're doing. Don't go to the wrong person and expect it can work in certain cases, but generally try to find people that have done similar music, and then you go, this is what we're doing. And number one, a lot of people are a lot more affordable and a lot more open to work than you'll ever think. People are scared to hire me. So many times I hear this and I'm like, all you got to do is send me an email. Go to the website, hire me. I mean, I rarely say no to jobs, and I say yes to every mixed job unless it looks like a complete fiasco, which is very, very, very rare. So I think you got to realize that people are happy to work, and we've done this thousands of times. It's like we know how to guide the process and make it efficient and fast and figure out what you want and get there. It's not too hard.
I think that's really, really good advice. And, when you're listening to music that you like, checking credits is a great way to explore that, but also talking to people in town and getting together with producers and, effectively interviewing them, finding out what their style of work is like. I mean, any audio professional, your mixing engineer, recording engineer, your mastering engineer, pick up the phone and talk to them, see if they're open to you, exploring what's the vibe, what do you have common goals. If you don't, sometimes they'll recommend other people that you can consider. And that's always a question you can ask any of the people sitting up here. If not us, then who? And we probably have 20 people that we could recommend that you talk to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For our next question, Mara, don't we have resources online that can direct people to different mixers or masters in our Portland communities so they can look through that?
We are relaunching the business directory.
Okay.
We're in process right now.
We've done a soft launch, surprise, of our business directory. We are working on getting more people into the studio production section of it. Talk to me afterwards if you are interested in that.
So continue to frequently check out Music Portland, and you will find all sorts of increasingly beneficial resources for yourselves and your work.
We did not pay Tave, so just so you know. What's your name?
I'm Nicolette. Thank you so much. The very interesting presentation. I went to school for music, and that was really interesting. It was fascinating. I would have paid a lot of money to know that several years ago. But my question is actually about the presentation, because I'm curious if you found in any of your research instances in which, or maybe this isn't answerable, but instances in which the recording that charted was not the exact same master or mix and master as the recording that was initially released. For instance, Oliver Anthony, I'm curious if maybe somewhere halfway up the ladder, that song took a long time to eventually chart. Maybe somebody sneakily took just a second to stab at mastering that song. I'd be curious to know if that just goes uncredited somewhere on Spotify, or if that wasn't information that you found at all.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is this, of course, there is this veneer of authenticity that can be very important, especially if the artist is pitched as a grassroots artist. And by the way, I'm not a TikTok person, but my kids are, and I've had to research it a lot for this and related projects. And, one of the things that comes up is you'll have people on TikTok who out TikTok artists as industry plants and that kind of thing, right? And so there's this idea that that we want homegrown stuff. We don't want I think there is a distinction between homegrown or grassroots stuff that sounds good, right? That doesn't mean you can't work with a professional to make it sound good, but also have the artist still stay very true to their roots. Now, your question, so we did see some examples of situations. So typically what it would be an artist that posted something on SoundCloud that kind of blew up there, or then later, of course, TikTok is really where it tends to blow up more now. Something started, catching fire on TikTok, and they quickly sign a deal with a record label, and then they recut it. So there was one artist in our sample named Baby Tate, who had been putting songs out for many years on SoundCloud, and then signed a record deal, and then one of the songs from SoundCloud, and again, this is, who knows how much, manipulation there was behind the scenes. One of the songs that hadn't been released by the label blew up suddenly on TikTok from her SoundCloud account, and then, and I would be very surprised if at that point that hadn't been sort of remastered or something. But to the extent that those, are credited or not, yeah, I'm sure there's some manipulation, that happens. It can be very hard to catch. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the records with respect to industry credits are very spotty often, and in lots of different places. We had to consult many times many different sources and go outside of official sources and look at, Billboard or Wikipedia or whatever, just trying to figure out who are these people, who was involved, and oftentimes there was conflicting information. But yeah, I think there was oftentimes if something blew up, somebody might step in and goose it a little bit with some professional touch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, 2 more questions.
My question is it's pretty copyright specific. You started with kind of the value of sound recording copyrights.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is kind of in the future landscape of copyrights in publishing, is it better to just have like an arsenal of like performing arts copyrights for individual songs? Or, what value is there in having like an album, like a sound recording copyright for a whole EP or a whole album?
Well, so right now, I mean, the interesting thing about sound recording copyrights is in the law, they are a more limited right than the musical composition right. But it's also the case that sound recording copyright owners make much more money from those copyrights, especially in the streaming age, than the music publishers who own the music composition copyright. So sound recording copyright owners make more than 3 times as much so if you have a sound recording of a musical composition, the record company that owns the sound recording right is making more than 3 times as much as the music publisher that owns the composition. So I would definitely say that sound recordings are the more valuable. Having said that, it all depends on the song. And certainly there are songs where the underlying composition is even more valuable than any particular sound recording of the song. I don't think that the sound recording copyright is going to go anywhere anytime soon. I don't think it's endangered. But there has been a concerted effort, I think, by the technorati, as well as many people in my field, legal scholars, who basically think that copyright has been overextended. The term of copyright is too long. The rights are too strong. Copyright owners' market power is too strong. And so there has been a concerted effort from many different corners to push back on copyright, try to pare back on copyright rights, or at least limit where possible the rights of copyright owners. And so in some ways, again, our study is just kind of meant to provide one data point in response to that push, if that makes sense.
Thank you. All right, Cameron, take it home. Take us home.
All right. Hey, I'm Cameron. I help run a group called Portland Music Producers, which is now partnered with MusicPortland, and our goal is to have a more tight-knit community of music producers of all different types here in Portland. And I love this presentation, by the way, so thank you very much, and everyone involved. I wanted to touch briefly on another part of it that I saw, which, outside of working with professionals, which is perhaps just working with other people, period. Because I see a lot of people that they just starting there, they're not even working with other people, period, let alone professionals. And I think people should work with professionals. But I want to touch on some things that were said earlier. Larry mentioned collaboration. It's all about collaboration. And someone made the point earlier about intimidation with working with studios and professionals, which I've seen as well. I think there is a lot of intimidation. So my question is, I want everyone here to succeed. How do we all, start mixing it up in more of a primordial broth, so to speak, so that we can mix the professional skills with, perhaps some fresh perspectives from beginners, and there's not as much intimidation. What is the community that you want to see that could help make some of this successful product happen?
Well, events like this are pretty great. But I'm someone who's benefited from mentorship. I got started as an audio engineer because I was a singer-songwriter recording my album with an engineer and producer, and I heard the way that two different microphones sounded on my vocals, and they had a completely different emotional quality, and I was like, well, now I care about gear. And went to community college at Clackamas Community College, and then got a mentor from one of my teachers there. So anyone can, take classes at community college. Anyone can, you meet people at events like this. And I think the line between, like you're saying, like professional and, DIY or at-home person, that can all blend when we're working on projects together. And I think, maybe some of the intimidation factor comes in when, money is being exchanged. But I've definitely paid people for their time to give me lessons and also for mentorship as well. And I think that that's an important thing that you can do also. So there's so many different ways to, I guess, blend. I don't know about the primordial soup of it all. But I think that, there's a lot of already collaboration happening between artists at every level and producers and engineers at every level. Larry's been working for 40 years? You've been working for 20 years? 25 years? I've been working for 5 years as a professional at this. So we're all on the stage just showing different stages of our careers as well.
I think we all have the same spirit of collaborating, ideas, for instance, I met Larry and I'm like, hey man, let's go have breakfast or coffee and talk gear and share ideas. And, I think we're all into that, we're all into growing. And you just never know where you're going to learn something from, I might have a conversation with you and you could teach me something about, hey, did you check out this thing or that, I think we're all open to that. As far as all you can do is, like Larry said, email somebody and say, hey, I've had people do that to where, I would love to come and talk to you, and we just hang out and, talk shop, So I think we're all probably more open than you might think, So anyways, it doesn't hurt to ask,
I don't doubt it.
I think we're good. That was a great last question, Cameron. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
I have one last statement to make. So in regards to music, again, to push Music Portland, because this is Portland, it's for all of us that live here, in various aspects of music in which we make art or wish to get art musically out there. And Sean Flora, who's not here tonight, but who is the sound engineer, I met him, as a matter of fact, at a Music Portland event for the first time, when we first started 5-6 years ago. And these meet and greets, or when you're having a social ahead of time or afterwards, are an amazing way to just chat up your local musicians, your local recorders, mixers, and you never know with whom you're going to work in the future and where they're going to end up. And it becomes a really brotherly, sisterly sort of thing. So I encourage all of you to come to another Music Portland event. And where are we next month?
TBD.
Okay,
TBD.
So again, check Music Portland. And stick around and have a drink. They make wonderful cocktails up there at the bar.
Tabe's doing my job,
coming.
y'all.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for staying so long. I appreciate it. Thank you, Eric, Alyssa, Michael. Thank you so much. Feel free to hang out for the next 20 minutes.